And the Chinese will stop at nothing to secure their investments in Obor. Reports say that they are talking to Baloch leaders to cut a deal with them. No surprises then that Beijing may be trying to meddle in Kashmir as well. A minister in the Jammu and Kashmir government in India claims that China is assuming a much bigger role in the valley and that the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the terror group behind some of the biggest attacks on Indian soil, has been practically adopted. That's the word he used, practically adopted by Beijing. Speaking to an Indian daily, the minister Naeem Akhtar said, and I'm quoting, "The Kashmir issue is not limited to the fight between India and Pakistan now. There is another major factor involved. It isn't Pakistan alone, it is China too." General Bipin Rawat said the army is ready to fight on both fronts, but there aren't two fronts anymore. Now it is one single front, circling around. From Bhutan to Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh Valley to Jammu, Sri Lanka and the Maldives. It is all one front. Pakistan and China are not separate. Raising a red flag over growing militancy in the state, Mr. Akhtar said that it was due to support not just from Pakistan but also China. He said that it would only be a matter of time before the youth who indulged in stone pelting in Kashmir took to guns, possibly sponsored by China. This is not the first time, in fact, that China has been accused of protecting terror groups like the Jaish-e-Mohammed. Beijing has repeatedly blocked moves to blacklist the terror group's chief, Masood Azhar, at the United Nations. We've seen that. China's protection of Masood Azhar is only one component of Chinese campaign to provide all-weather ally Pakistan its diplomatic support. Chinese authorities consistently try to undermine all Indian attempts to officially name Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism on international platforms like BRICS or the Heart of Asia Conference. Meanwhile, China's clout in the Indian subcontinent seems to be growing even further. Nepal's newly elected Prime Minister, Mr. K.P. Oli, has said that he wants to deepen ties with China to explore more options and get more leverage in his dealings with India. Mr. Oli's telling comments came in an interview to Hong Kong's South China Morning Post. He told the newspaper that he wants to, quote-unquote, update relations with India in keeping with the times. And these are his words. And he favors a review of all special provisions of the India-Nepal relations, including the long-established practice of Nepalese soldiers serving in India's armed forces. And I'm quoting from what he said. "We have great connectivity with India and an open border. All that's fine, and we'll increase connectivity even further, but we cannot forget that we have two neighbors. We don't want to depend on one country or have one option." Mr. Oli went on to talk about the long-standing tradition of the Nepalese serving in the Indian Army, and he said, and I'm quoting again, "This should be internally and mutually discussed and corrected. If necessary, we live in a new world and Nepal is starting a new journey. We have to update whatever is considered outdated and bring it in line with the modern era." That's not all. The Nepalese Prime Minister has also vowed to revive the China-backed $2.5 billion hydropower project, which was scrapped by the previous government. In fact, it was K.P. Oli who had planned the project during his first stint as Prime Minister of Nepal to end landlocked Nepal's dependence on India. The third point he made was on infrastructure development, which he sees as an important means to narrow the distance with China. Remember, China's physical remoteness compared with next-door India is a hindrance to deeper Sino-Nepal relations. Mr. Oli also spoke about improving rail and road network between Nepal and China through Tibet. Specifically, he spoke about 3 roads that are under construction connecting Nepal and China, which should be ready in a couple of years. He said, and I'm quoting again, "If we can connect this railway network to our East-West Rail project, it can revolutionize China-India trade with Nepal in the middle." China has been investing heavily in Nepal, remember, blunting India's influence in the Himalayan country. Let's turn to the third neighbor in this circle. This is Bangladesh. President Xi Jinping visited the country in 2016. He signed deals worth more than $20 billion and within 2 years beat India in its own backyard. Here's the latest coming from Bangladesh. A Chinese consortium has won a stake in the Dhaka Stock Exchange. They beat the bid of the National Stock Exchange of India. So Bangladesh has given this contract, the share, to China over India. A Bangladeshi official said on Tuesday that Dhaka has agreed to sell a large stake in its stock exchange to China's Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges. Their consortium offered to buy a quarter of the bourse's 1.8 billion shares. The Mumbai-based National Stock Exchange had offered $0.18 per share during the tender process this month. The Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges of China made a joint higher bid of $122 million and also offered additional technical support worth nearly $37 million. At least one media report said that the competing bids expose tensions in Bangladesh as it juggles growing interest from China against long-standing ties with neighbor India. But that is not to suggest that Bangladesh is cold-shouldering India. Indian companies have won multi-billion-dollar contracts in key sectors in recent years, and more recently, Dhaka blacklisted a Chinese construction firm for allegedly trying to bribe a Bangladeshi official. But Dhaka is trying to do the balancing act. It's the same story in the Maldives, with the Maldives tilting more towards China. Emergency has been extended in that country. In fact, India is not the only one alarmed. America's Pacific Command Chief, Admiral Harry Harris, flagged off his country's concerns over China's ambitious trillion-dollar One Belt, One Road or OBOR. He told the Congress, and I quote, "One Belt, One Road is in fact much more than just an economic engine that China is undertaking. OBOR seeks to displace the United States and our friends and allies in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, by China. It is a concerted, strategic endeavor by China to gain a foothold and displace the United States and our allies and partners in the region." These remarks last week were well timed. Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull will be in Washington on Wednesday to discuss, among others, a regional infrastructure scheme which would be an alternative to China's OBOR. The Australian Financial Review quoted a senior American official whose name was not disclosed as saying, and I'm quoting that, "China might build a port which on its own is not economically viable. We could make it economically viable by building a road or rail linking that port." A dialogue between the Quad or Quadrilateral comprising Australia, Japan, India and the US is already underway, although at a nascent stage. Parallelly, India and Japan are working on the Asia-Africa growth corridor that has a canvas which rivals OBOR, stretching as it does from Japan to Southeast Asia, South Asia to East Africa. This initiative is also in its early stages, but India will be able to leverage Japan's considerable financial muscle to push projects in Africa and offer a counter to China. It's all work in progress. India was the first country, remember, to object to China's OBOR because it violated Indian sovereignty in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. India boycotted this project and its summit, the OBOR summit, in Beijing in May last year for that reason. India also cited the secrecy surrounding the project, the sustainability of those projects, and the fact that OBOR seemed entirely China-directed, designed to be win-win for China. What does it do? China's investments in infrastructure may develop regional trade, but it will increase demand only for Chinese professionals and technical services. It opens new markets, but only for Chinese goods. Chinese investments promote the use of its currency, the yuan, internationally. This is crucial to China's plans of holding a greater portion of global currency reserves. The growing opposition has not stopped China, though, from pushing ahead with OBOR. But as the Quad and other countries get their act together, OBOR could begin to stumble. Europe, for one, is already pushing back against China's attempt to dominate through this project. New laws will prevent Chinese companies from taking over European tech and finance majors. But Eastern Europe remains vulnerable to Chinese penetration. Radicalism threatens pluralistic societies, and fellow democracies such as Canada and India are not immune to it. India views Sikh radicalism in Canada as a clear and present danger. It wants Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, to share India's concerns. But will Trudeau oblige? A day ahead of his visit to Amritsar, the question we are asking is, can Trudeau condemn the Khalistani sympathizers in his country? WION's Ramesh Ramachandran brings you the next report.
Last month, Justin Trudeau raised political correctness a notch higher. Take a listen.
We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all learn from each other.
The question is, can he bring himself to call out Sikh extremism in Canada? Or will he wear his political correctness on his sleeve while touring India? Canada is home to more than 1 million people of Indian origin. Like in neighbouring United States and Europe, the Indian-Canadian community is an influential one economically and over the years politically too. The Sikhs in particular hold sway over Canadian life and politics. Sample this. There are 19 persons of Indian origin in the Canadian Parliament. 17 of the 19 are from Trudeau's Liberal Party, and 15 of them, as you would have guessed, are Sikhs. There are 4 Sikhs in Trudeau's cabinet: Defence Minister Harjit Singh Sajjan, Infrastructure Minister Amarjit Sohi, Science and Innovation Minister Navdeep Bains, and Bardish Chhajjar, Minister of Small Business and Tourism, who's also leader of the lower house of Canada's legislature. Little wonder then that Trudeau is sometimes called Justin Singh for having more Sikhs in his cabinet than even Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. But ties between Canada and India haven't exactly blossomed under Trudeau. The reasons are not far to seek. For one, India accuses the Trudeau government of treating Sikh radicalism with kid gloves. Amarjit Sohi, for instance, was jailed in India under an anti-terrorism law. More recently, on the 6th of April last year, the provincial legislature of Ontario passed a resolution moved by Harinder Malhi, a lawmaker from Trudeau's Liberal Party, which called the 1984 anti-Sikh riots in India as genocide. India responded the very next day. The Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said, and I quote, "We have noted the passage of a private member's motion in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario on April 6th. We reject this misguided motion, which is based on a limited understanding of India, its constitution, society, ethos, rule of law, and the judicial process. Our views have been conveyed to the government and political leadership in Canada," unquote. The same month, Trudeau attended a parade in Toronto on what is known as Khalsa Day. Some in the Canadian Sikh community observed the day to glorify militants who were killed inside the Golden Temple during Operation Blue Star in 1984. India's current National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, was involved in that operation as a young intelligence officer. As if that was not provocation enough, recently, some gurudwaras or Sikh places of worship in Canada barred entry of Indian government officials. Over the last decade and more, Canada has denied visas to some serving and retired Indian military, paramilitary and intelligence officials. Last year, a former Inspector General of Central Reserve Police Force, Tejinder Singh Dhillon, was denied visa because a Canadian consular official accused the CRPF of committing human rights abuses. The Indian Foreign Ministry was quick to raise an objection. 3 serving brigadiers, a retired Lieutenant General of the Indian Army, a former Intelligence Bureau official, a retired Border Security Force personnel, all were denied visa. Similarly, in 2013, India denied Jagmeet Singh, the Canada-born leader of New Democratic Party, for allegedly indulging in attacking India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. A section of the Canadian media thinks Trudeau should call out the Sikh separatists. An editorial in the conservative-leaning Toronto Sun says extremism of any kind has no place in Canada. The 1985 bombing of an Air India plane by Sikh extremists in Canada, which killed 331 people, is a case in point. Some Sikhs living in Canada are said to idolize the men who allegedly planned and executed the bombing in their quest for the Sikh nation of Khalistan. Posters celebrating these men as heroes are seen at Sikh parades or festivals. The editorial says it makes for dodgy politics. But another Canadian media report quotes a Trudeau aide as saying that while his government does not support extremism, it will also not deny Indian Canadians the freedom to speak out in favour of a separate Sikh state if they wish. How will that go down with New Delhi is anybody's guess. With Ramesh Ramachandran, Bureau Report, WION.